This is a radio broadcast addressed from the League of Nations on the global war effort against the Morgana threat, where we report the recent happenings amongst the major nations contributing to the defense of our united front. I am your speaker, Ammaraglio Maus, but you may refer to me as Commissar, or simply the Speaker, whichever you or your government prefers. September has come and gone, and we now find ourselves in the first week of October, and it seems that the League of Nations' influence is beginning to wane as nations continue strengthening hostilities towards one another in the European war. The Morgana are more than happy to see our united front crack under its own weight, seem to be increasing activity within said regions of conflict. Hopefully, nations can put aside their differences and work together for a better future, one with humanity in it. First up, a news report from the League itself. Senior naval officers from neutral countries convened at what is now known as the Napoli Conference and finished drafting their new guidelines for conduct regarding the war against the Morgana. The League of Nations supported this idea of cooperation and with their assistance sent out letters to all captains to gauge support for these guidelines. In total, 68% of captains responded and signed in favor of the agreement. While not all captains supported everything that was listed, and some even questioning the validity and integrity of a non-binding agreement, a majority of the responding captains at war supported a simple statement, one that was non-binding but impossible to ignore, that Morgana had to be fought everywhere, but also that the nations whom had invaded Poland needed to be contained. The latter inclusion did not find favor in either Berlin or Moscow, unsurprisingly, but the reputation of the INPF as an independent organization became firmer as a result. In general, the idea of independence for bell captains did not find favor in any nation, but for now there was no alternative to curb their speech and prosecute a successful war at sea. For now. Following that, we have special reports from the major alliances across the globe, starting with the Allies. The Allies signaled that their intent for October would be bottling German surface and underwater raiders in the North Sea, as well as enforcing a near-total blockade on the Axis through the war plan Battle of the North Sea, which found 72% support amongst the Allied delegates. Their first operation was an unqualified success, sinking numerous auxiliaries in one of Germany's destroyers in a chaotic action on October 1st. Sustained operations in the North Sea will undoubtedly make for dangerous transit for any German vessel so inclined. This, the first direct naval action of the war, has undoubtedly stirred the warlike spirit of all of Britain. Hopefully, that warlike spirit won't interfere with contributions to the united front against the Morgana. Next up, news from the Axis, who decided upon the war plan Grappling for Supremacy, which found only 55% support from nations and attaches within the Axis powers. This October, the Axis naval strategy looked abroad for more resources and possibly more allies. Brazil was a likely candidate as they had ample resources and a significant German population, but the government was not always friendly to the two-toe Brazilians. It may be possible, especially in the light of the Panama Conference, to change that, however. Gifts were made to key government officials and a network of sympathizers was cultivated. So far, the United States surprisingly has had no comment on this as of this time. After that, we hear news from the Comintern, in which the consensus was clear amongst members. This week, primarily supported by the Soviet Union, the war plan Popular Fronts found 74% support. Lenin's view on the revolutionary situation was, quote, "The bottoms don't want and the tops cannot live in the old ways," end quote. If political consciousness and activism could be spread among the working class, it might just be possible to turn enemies to allies. At the very worst, it could not hurt to weaken the enemies of communism, while strengthening the Union with intelligence and trade. The United States was a likely target, but the French were riskier, especially so with the recent banning of the Communist Party and their government. However, if the French communists could keep organized, they might just survive the purges and be ready for when the time is right. Following the reports of the world's factions, we make our way to the Mediterranean to hear news from Italy, the leading nation in combating the Morgana threat yet again, lending to the credence that their effort is more than just a meager show of force. Due to their continued effort, the League has decided that Italy shall be the first to receive an investment in the form of a currently unnamed shipbuilding program theorized to produce bells. Though many solid options have been nominated, there are a few captains who are in vehement support of a moss boat for some reason. Regardless of what ship is nominated, it will take an estimated 3 months before the process is complete. The great story this week, however, was that of the Bell-assisted construction of the new shipyards in Mogadishu, drawn from the collection of steel, guns, and equipment that was harvested by Morgana across the Indian Ocean, and then taken from them by the Regia Marina, who executed the war plan Abyssinia Resurgent, which found 66% support. In response, the Morgana made another furious series of attacks off the Somali coast, trying to take back what they had lost, and the Italian Navy beat them senseless for trying. At the end of it all, the coasts were more secure. Mogadishu's role as a secure, wartime Indian Ocean trading hub was founded, and construction facilities that might one day produce warships were started upon. On the Italian coast proper, clouds were gathering. La Spezia came under a period of sustained bombardment from a screening delusion, and with French and Italian eyes turned further afield, more and more Morgana seemed to be spotted around the Ligurian Sea, perhaps sensing opportunity. The Regia Marina should likely consider returning to defend their coast before disaster strikes. And a final note, in response to the declaration of Napoli, the Regia Marina wants to remind all captains of their oaths to the king and fascism. However, Mussolini is rumored to have been gratified that this new internationalism happened under Italian auspices. After that, we head across the Atlantic to the United States, who is the second contributing nation against the Morgana threat. America has been quite busy recently and appears to be attempting to cast off the chains of isolation through their recent efforts, with this week being much of the same. The powers within the United States government were fairly united in their decision, finding 83% support in favor of the enactment of war plan reaching across the oceans. Alongside this, the biggest resolution that came out of the Panama Conference was dramatic. The United States announced the enactment of the Open Oceans Navy Act, in which the United States and several South American nations would offer safe harbor to any warship of any nation that was involved in defensive action against the Morgana invaders. Maritime neutrality remained in force, but it was deeply unclear how to determine if a warship was purely belligerent versus combating the Morgana. Clever captains might be able to abuse the spirit of the convention to expand their ability to operate against shipping. As a result of the Open Oceans Navy Act, the British were scandalized, even as the League of Nations and subsequently Germany were effusively positive. And around the world, the Bells themselves seemed to take this as proof that the war was winnable, that humanity wasn't beyond saving. But of course, the long-term consequences for Atlantic trade and safety could hardly be guessed at. The Roosevelt administration just had to hope for the best, and that all nations would play nice in the presence of our invaders. And lastly, of note, in response to the declaration of Napoli, the United States Department of the Navy wishes to remind all captains of their oaths to the Republic. Following that, we again head back over the Atlantic to hear recent events from the United Kingdom, the third contributing member to the United Front against the Morgana. As the East Indies station continued showing the flag in India, this week the home fleet prepared for its first major sortie and joint operation with the French Marine Nationale. This came about from the announcement made by Prime Minister Chamberlain earlier this week enacting the war plan containing the Kriegsmarine, which found 72% support amongst the Houses of Parliament. The Kriegsmarine had made another hard push into the North Sea recently, and though they claimed to be keeping the area clear of Morgana, it was lost on absolutely no one that U-boats were prowling in the approaches and that British trading ships were being indirectly sunk. Members of the 7th Destroyer Flotilla had been sent all the way from the Humber to assist the Allied fleet, and as they took their place in the screen, they encountered a large group of Kriegsmarine destroyers and cruisers some 20 miles off the Dutch coast. There was no hesitation in their attack, and as the Germans returned fire, the Morgana started to arrive like sharks who smelled blood in the water. In the end, the naval action was declared as a victory for the British and the French, and was a valuable lesson in Allied resolve for the German Kriegsmarine. Particularly noteworthy from the British side, Jervis was credited with the sinking of U-40 as well as the rescue of some of her crew. Another U-boat was found and sunk north of Scotland, but some Allied shipping still fell prey to the remaining raiders. The League of Nations promptly annoyed the Allies by urging all sides to make restitution where appropriate and to work harder to ensure that the common front against the Morgana remain unshaken. It was, unfortunately, poorly timed and unrealistic. But there is a point to it, dear listener. Indeed, all the violence and all the commotion seemed to draw Morgana from elsewhere in the Atlantic toward the English Channel. Across the world, there was an increase in Morgana activity, and in the Pacific coast of Canada as well, poorly defended and very exposed to the enemy. We strongly urge all nations to please work together despite the growing conflict. Otherwise, we might just be doing the Morgana's job for them. And of last note, in response to the Declaration of Napoli, the Admiralty wants to remind all captains of their oath to the King. And now for a hop across the channel to hear news from France, who is the fourth contributing nation to the war against the Morgana. Following their recent successes in the Bay of Biscay, and with the Royal Navy preparing operations of their own, members of the French government decided it was time to turn their attention back to the thorn in their side, Germany, through the war plan the Nazi Beast, which passed with the 78% majority. The two great fleets of the Allies, the Marine Nationale and the Royal Navy, met near the Channel and steamed north on October 1st, seeking for their quarry. Morgana were found in abundance, and strangely enough, soon dispersed. The Germans, however, were found, and naval action occurred shortly thereafter. The recent battle was a blow to the German Kriegsmarine, whose forces were defeated piecemeal as they emerged from the mists into the screens of Allied fleets. The din of the battle was heard from the Hague and lasted throughout the day. Perhaps the most famous engagement of the battle, the French destroyer Jaguar, with assistance from her sister Chacal, left the German destroyer Bruno Heinemann in flames, only to protect the latter's crew from a pair of Morgana avarices that came to steal whatever they could grab from the burning hulk. Unsurprisingly, the success and the coordination between France and the United Kingdom improved the morale of both, and the value of their alliance was clearly affirmed. They knew the Germans could be beaten, and now the Germans knew it too. The U-boat menace continued unabated, however, and two were discovered and sunk in the approaches. German success against shipping was scant, but that was more due to the Morgana than any other factor. When the League of Nations politely suggested that fighting the Morgana had to be the highest of priority, they were not so politely rebuffed by French officials. In other news, Paris became host to the government of the Republic of Poland in exile, as Władysław Roszkiewicz took the oath of office of the presidency in the Polish embassy, and subsequently appointing Władysław Sikorski Prime Minister and Commander-in-Chief of the Polish Armed Forces. Meanwhile, as France and Italy both loosened their grips on the Mediterranean, Morgana raiding along the Algerian coast intensified, and the people of Algiers wondered if they were of any concern to Paris at all. Following that, we head over to Germany, the fifth contributing nation against the Morgana threat. Previously, the Kriegsmarine had been triumphant in the Baltic Sea and then hurried over to Kiel to repel Morgana attacks. Emboldened by their recent success, new orders came from Berlin this week to enact war plans slipping the cage, in which 63% of captains were in support. Through this plan, the Kriegsmarine set out into the North Sea, intending to drive the Morgana fleets in the Heligoland Bight southward and towards the English Channel. The Allies anticipated them, however. German chasers harrying the Morgana south emerged from the thick mists into the waiting arms of the Royal Navy and the Marine Nationale. The Kriegsmarine lost several auxiliaries before the fleet could make their escape to Wilhelmshaven. Bruno Heinemann was caught in presumed loss after a sharp action with the second large destroyer division and a pack of Morgana avarices. When the fighting broke, it was the Germans who had come away most badly bruised. Plans to expand their surface activities in the Atlantic seemed, for the moment, unthinkable. If the battle was a defeat for the Kriegsmarine, reaffirming the strength of the blockade of Germany, it was a corrective shock to Berlin. Sources say that the Kriegsmarine is expected to more closely follow national policy and seek vengeance in the future, instead of pursuing imaginary agreements with the British. In light of this, the League of Nations' lofty dreams of a unified human front, including Germany, against the Morgana threat seemed on the verge of dissipating. On the other hand, news from America signals that it might be possible for an enterprising captain to potentially base in the New World with all the attendant opportunities. It also recalls to mind the voyages of the merchant submarine Deutschland, now that the blockade is tightening in the North Sea. Of final note, in response to the declaration of Napoli, the Kriegsmarine reminds all captains of their oaths to the Fuhrer. As a result, renewed scrutiny has been placed on bell captains in particular, along with their political loyalty. After that, we head over to the Pacific to hear news from the Empire of Japan, the sixth-ranking nation against the Morgana. This week saw the end of yet another Japanese government. Prime Minister Abe's mandate to make peace in China had failed, and his policies had led both difficulties in the imperial project and the attack on Tokyo itself. He resigned his position following both a striking collapse in army and navy support. He was replaced in the position after furious negotiations by Yunai Mitsumasa, formerly the Navy Minister. Surprisingly to some, he resigned his naval commission to take the new post. He was not a popular choice with the hardliners. Mr. Mitsumasa was closely associated with the Imperial Japanese Navy, and with a policy of outreach to the United States and Great Britain. But it was widely accepted that he may be able to successfully disengage from China while maintaining both economic concessions and the prestige of victory. The difficult nature of the Battle of Changsha and further Chinese progress towards Wuhan made certain plans more urgent for the new Prime Minister. His first imperative, however, would be to salvage the situation in China. In other news, due to the recent Morgana attack on Tokyo, the Imperial Japanese Army began updating and reinforcing the coastal defenses around Tokyo, and subsequently laid down the plans for the defense of the eastern home isles. An army officer in charge of the planning had one thing to say regarding the attack. Quote, "The failure of the Navy is one of the highest degree. They had one job and they outrageously failed in all aspects. The lives of the people and that of the Emperor was put at risk because of their horrendous inability to protect our home. And as the Navy continues to fail, it falls upon us to protect our nation. And unlike them, we will not fail." End quote. And a final note, in response to the declaration of Napoli, the Navy gifted new imperial portraits to all Japanese bell captains as meditations on the source of all authority. Additional togatai was sent aboard bell ships of Japanese origin as well. Lastly, we turn our attention back to Europe with our comrades, the Soviet Union, the seventh contributing nation to the war against the Morgana threat. After the decisive victory that was the Battle of Arkhangelsk, the Soviets subsequently secured the eastern Baltic Sea in the aftermath of the previous week's great battle between the Morgana and the German Kriegsmarine. Soviet access to Latvian, Lithuanian, and Estonian ports were now guaranteed, but Finland remained an open question. Seeing this as an opportunity, orders came from Moscow enacting the war plan, the Baltic Ultimatum, which found 73% support in the Politburo. A new conference would be convened to settle issues of security and joint Morgana defense. Kotka and Helsinki had been hammered by the invaders for weeks, and it was hoped that might make Prime Minister Kajinda's government finally open to the concessions required by Moscow. However, an unspoken question was whether or not other powers might frustrate diplomatic efforts to resolve the Finnish question. The League of Nations was delighted to help facilitate these discussions, particularly as tensions among other parties were rising in the North Sea. Sources say that it was believed that some Soviet bells met with the bell of Finland, knowing that they shared one single purpose above all others. While Moscow's attention was on the west, however, Morgana activity in the Pacific became more aggressive. They seemed to be particularly active around the Straits of Tartar, with Morgana land incursions into the Khabarovsk Krai rumored to be happening. And a final note, in response to the declaration of Napoli, the Soviet Navy and the NKVD remind all captains of their loyalties to the state. Rumor has it that political commissars were placed aboard the ships of particularly troubling captains, and those especially with bells. And that concludes the League of Nations War Report for week 1 of October. Despite the worrying escalation in Europe, we strongly encourage and advise all nations to work together against the Morgana so that we can guarantee a future for all of us. And as a reminder to all captains and citizens alike that this League of Nations broadcast is intended on keeping you informed about the unified war effort against the Morgana. But there is more you can do. Consider buying some war bonds to help our boys and girls on the ocean stay afloat so they can keep fighting the Morgana. Doing so will net you prestige that you can utilize in a variety of ways. Though, if you're a captain looking for more, consider purchasing a League of Nations Commissioner membership card, just like the one I've got right here. Becoming a commissioner grants you access to our exclusive network of traders and salvage crews to gain more resources, and the ability to meet with our expert naval training staff and diplomatic envoys to earn more experience both on and off the battlefield. You can also gain the knowledge of our professional R&D teams and production centers to build equipment quickly and squish those gremlins even faster. And don't forget to take advantage of our experienced harbor staff for faster refit and repair times. Top it all off, you'll be letting the bells know who and what you truly support, gaining the adoration that much quicker. Thank you for listening, and may you have smooth seas.